Hi, everybody. I have not seen the Beis Medrash so full for quite a long time, so Baruch Hashem, thank you for coming, and we hope that you'll have a very positive experience, first of all, in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, which is your home, our home, and also to see what a yeshiva is. For some of you, it might be the very first time that you've been in a yeshiva setting, but you'll see what it means to study the Torah and to open your hearts to the wisdom of Judaism. And the prayer would be that you would take it with you back to South Africa, and hopefully it'll be a great source of inspiration. So I'm always a little uneasy to be in a Q&A position, because that implies I have answers to all questions. So rest assured, I certainly do not have answers to all questions. But I always tell people, you can ask me anything, but I don't guarantee I will be able to answer it, but we can try. So if anyone would like to ask some questions, we can talk about it and the like. I don't know if there's an MC or just... Okay? So you have, Baruch Hashem, you have reached perfect clarity and total understanding. There are no questions in your life whatsoever. And I commend you. You've only been here a short time, and you've already reached that level, huh? Yeah.
Thank you, Breitowitz, for teaching the students. I'll open it up, and then I feel once to ask one question.
Okay.
A question on the friends have asked me is the concept of free will, how it works. Why do you have such a thing? What does it mean to make a choice between good and bad, making a moral decision? What is the true definition of free will versus any other choice that you may make? Perhaps the Rav could...
Yeah, so free will, which is called Bechira, is a very, very fundamental concept in Judaism, and Maimonides writes that free will is the foundation of accountability and responsibility, because after all, if I was born to be righteous or born to be evil, then why do I deserve commendation for my goodness? And why do I deserve condemnation for my evil? I'm just behaving based on the pre-programmed nature that I was born with. And therefore Maimonides says that the whole system of reward and punishment presupposes the idea of free will. Moreover, we have a concept called repentance. I commit sin, so I ask God for forgiveness, and I resolve to change my ways, and God forgives me. That is called tshuva. Now, Maimonides argues, in the absence of free will, number one, why would I have to do tshuva? There is no moral opprobrium to my sinning. And number two, without free will, how would it be possible to do tshuva and change? You're born a certain way. So both the need of tshuva and the possibility of tshuva presuppose free will. Now, free will is actually a big exception to the spiritual laws that govern the universe. We believe that God is omnipotent, God is all-powerful. Every single process of the universe is controlled by God, whether the sun goes up, the sun goes down, the rotation of the earth, the growth cycle, precipitation. God controls those processes. But when it comes to my decision to be a righteous or evil person, that is my decision. That is not God. In other words, God has a hands-off attitude. God ties his hands and basically says, I'm not going to interfere with your choice. You are the master of your spiritual fate. You are the captain of your spiritual ship. That's quite amazing. I remember my own rabbi, my own Rosh Yeshiva, when he used to ask us, are we going to learn well? So our response would be, if God wills, we will learn well. And he would correct us. He would say, don't say if God wills. God certainly wants you to learn well. But God left the decision to you. So you shouldn't say, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, if God wills, I will learn well. What type of thing is that? You should say, Im Ertzeh Ani, if I want to learn, I'll learn well. That's what you should say. Now, why did God create this capacity for free will? Because after all, free will has some significant costs. Because of free will, there is murder, there is rape, there is crime, there is sin, there is evil. If God would have taken away free will, there wouldn't be any of these things. So what is the utility of introducing free will into the spiritual universe? And the answer is, from a systems engineering standpoint, free will is the facilitator of the maximization of goodness. Because goodness is virtuous only if it's chosen. Goodness is virtuous when I can desire to do evil and I could accomplish evil, but I opt for goodness. I have made a heroic choice. But if my goodness would just be programmed within me, that wouldn't be virtue. Life might be pleasant, but it's not virtuous. So in many, many ways, man's capacity for evil is a necessary evil to maximize goodness in the long run. There can be no goodness without the capacity of choosing evil. So that's why free will permeates the universe. Now, there are many, many issues about free will. Free will is a fascinating study that one can spend really your whole life thinking about. I'll just mention one of the famous questions about free will. We believe that God knows the future. So you wake up this morning and you have to make a decision. Should I put on tefillin or should I not put on tefillin? You have that choice. You can decide yes, you can decide no. But how can that be? God knew yesterday what you would be doing. God knew 100 years ago what you would be doing. God knew 1,000,000 years ago what you would be doing. So by the time I get up this morning, how can it be said I have a choice if that choice was already known 1,000,000 years ago? Right? How do you reconcile, to put it in more fancy terms, how do you reconcile free will with divine omniscience? Omniscience is God's knowledge of the future. It's a good question. It's one of those questions that people ask, even little children ask, and it's still a good question. Like, can God commit suicide? All of these. Can God make an object that's too heavy for him to move? These are questions that, even children ask, but, we can ask them as adults as well. So let me just give you one answer to this question, and that is the notion that once God knows our choice, there's no longer a choice, is only a question if you're existing in a framework of time. Because in the framework of time, the past already happened. So God already knows. But that's not the way God sees the future. God does not see the future as the future. God is observing past, present, future as a contemporaneous reality. Now, the same way, if I observe you davening, I did not affect your choice. I'm just observing what you're doing. God's observation of the future is similar to our observation of the present. He's not taking away the choice. He is simply observing the choice in the present moment, even though it's 1,000,000 years in the future. Now, granted, Maimonides himself writes that because we don't understand what it even means to live outside of the framework of time, so we really don't understand how can you see the future not as the future, but see the future as a concurrent. Even the word concurrent is a little misleading because that's also a temporal term, as a concurrent reality, but this is the nature of God's knowing. Another question about free will is, how can we realistically talk about free will if people are born into circumstances where obviously some options are not available to them? Somebody is born in the uncivilized tribes of Africa, or whatever it is. Are we supposed to say, they should have become a rabbi, they should have become a saintly person, they should have become a Rosh Yeshiva? I'm assuming they're Jewish. What about the circumstances of life? What about the family conditions? What about the poverty? Not everybody is born with the same choices, and not everybody is born with the same opportunities. So in what way can there be free will? So here I want to introduce to you a wonderful, wonderful concept from one of the great thinkers, Rabbi Dessler, who says that everybody has free will, but not every choice is at the same point in the spectrum. Meaning to say, Let's imagine you're a drug addict that is severely addicted to cocaine, and you're just lying in the street, or an alcoholic, that you're sleeping in your vomit. God does not expect you at that moment to make the choice to become Shabbos observant or whatever it is, because that's not a choice that's your fulcrum yet. That's not your point of deciding. Your choice is to check into rehab or not. In other words, there's always a fork in the road. There's always a choice you can make. It's not the same choice, meaning the Rambam's language, according to Rav Dessler, is a little misleading. The Rambam's language says every person can decide to be as righteous as Moses or as evil as Yeravam ben Nevat, who was one of the evil kings of Israel. That kind of implies every second you can make the choice to go from 0 to 100. Rav Dessler says that's not the way life works. Not everybody can go from 0 to 100. Maybe your choice is to go from -10 to -9.5. And that's the choice. And for that, God will hold you accountable. But God will not hold you accountable for choices that are beyond your particular level. So the way life works is, as I grow spiritually, I move further and further along a spectrum in which my choices are higher level choices. And at a lower level, I'm not expected to make the higher level choices, but I am expected to make the lower level choices. So Bechira is not a static, fixed concept. It's a dynamic concept that moves with you as you go through the different experiences of your life. So God is not going to ask the drug addict, why weren't you in yeshiva? But God will ask the drug addict, why didn't you check into a rehab facility, which could have brought you to a different level where you might be able to make other choices. So that's an extraordinarily useful idea. And Rav Dessler points out that for many of us, there are many issues that were part of our struggle at one point that we're no longer struggling with. And we're not going to get rewarded for that. So the drug addict will be rewarded for not taking cocaine. But if I'm not addicted, I'm not going to get rewarded because that's not part of my struggle anymore. I'm way past that. A person who's beginning to keep kosher and decides not to go to a McDonald's, God's going to reward you because you made a virtuous choice. But for people who've been kept kosher their whole lives, God is not going to reward them because they didn't go to a treif restaurant, because that's not their struggle. Bechira represents the struggle where you could go either way, and that struggle will change. There are certain areas that I've been victorious over that I'm way past, and there are certain areas I'm not yet there, and that's not part of my struggle either, because I'm not expected to make that choice. Right? But somewhere in the middle is your struggle area, and that is where the idea of Bechira comes in. Again, I could spend the whole hour on that. I don't want to spend the whole hour on this, but other questions just throughout you can think about that the Rambam addresses. God hardened Paro's heart by the 10 plagues. Problem is, that seems to be an override of his free will. Again, you can think about those questions and discuss them. Did you have a question? Yeah.
So with free will, this is a two-part question. And one is, one of the worst things people are saying you mustn't do. But it feels like in the world we live in today, with social media and the amount of people that there are in the world that you actually get to know in your life, it seems like an unattainable goal to not speak any Lashon Hara.
Yeah.
So does that mean everyone's just in this group of circumstance of struggle?
Well, yes. Again, I mean, God gives us commandments, and we have to try to keep those commandments to the best of our ability. And let me just remind you of a very, very simple idea. Voltaire is said to have remarked that we make a very big mistake that we allow the best to become the enemy of the better. What that means is we sometimes feel that since I'm condemned to failure no matter what, I'm not going to be perfect, so why bother to be better at all? And that is a pernicious mistake in life in all areas. Because just because you're living in an atmosphere where maybe perfection in this area may be impossible, does not mean you can't make significant improvements. And a significant improvement is not a failure, it is a success. So yeah, you've got to try to do the best that you can in a very difficult environment. Many people do try to control their speech. In fact, even people who aren't fully religious in terms of the ritual laws understand the destructive nature of negative speech. And social media creates a great temptation, a great trial, a great difficulty. But a moral person who wants to serve God tries to be strong in that area. Will you make some mistakes? You will, as we all make some mistakes. But that doesn't mean you don't start to try and do the best that you could. Okay? Okay, anything else? Okay, well, I don't know, yeah?
Most of us are university students, and we're on the next stage of life. What's one advice or one tip that you can give us to carry on the movement of Torah?
Yeah, so this is really important. You're in a university setting. Maybe there are a lot of Jews, maybe there are not a lot of Jews, but even if there's a lot of Jews, it's not likely there'll be a lot of Torah observant Jews. And in a way, it's kind of easy to follow Judaism when you're with a lot of religious Jews and you're in a yeshiva setting. It's much more difficult to apply this in the college campus. But one of the things I often say is that we spend so much time learning how to make a living that we never invest the time in learning how to make a life. And you have to know that you are more than your money-making capacity. I was a law professor for many years, so I'm more familiar with the legal profession than other professions. But there is a certain phenomenon called burnout, which, you're too young for that. But basically, we live in a very competitive society. From the time, in fact, I understand that in New York City, there are actually exclusive kindergartens that have a 5-year waiting list. Do you know what it means for a kindergarten to have a 5-year waiting list? That means as soon as your wife is pregnant, you must sign up your child to be able to get in when they're 5 to a kindergarten. Why would a kindergarten have a 5-year waiting list? Because you want to meet the right people. You want your kid to be exposed to the important families which can network and make connections. And then people get competitive to go to private schools and the best high schools, and then colleges, and then graduate programs, and then clerkships for law, to clerk for a judge. And then you join a law firm. I'll use law as an example just because I'm more familiar with it. And then you advance up the ranks from associate to partner. And then you become a partner and you make $500,000 a year or more. And you have this deal and that deal and that deal, and life is getting better and better and better. You have a gigantic house and 2.5 kids. I don't know who the half kid is, in the suburbs. And 3.5 cars. And then one day, you can be 35, you can be 45, you can be 50. The world crashes around you like a bunch of bricks, because your whole life you had another goal to achieve. So that's push me, this goal, that goal, that goal, that goal. But at some point, you have gone as far as you're going to go. At some point, you're not going to be president of whatever country. You're not going to be on the Supreme Court. You're not going to win the Olympics, and you're not going to win the Nobel Prize. So what do I do with the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years of my life? Just another deal? More of the same? Alexander the Great, Alexander of Macedonia, died after conquering virtually the whole known world. He died at the age of 31 or 32. And the legend has it, I don't know if it's true, that he died out of grief because he said he had no more worlds to conquer. I don't want to, make you sad or unhappy or nervous about this. But this is what happens. A person invests their whole life in getting ready for a profession, for training, and they advance. There's always something new. But then you hit a ceiling. And you say, what else is left in this life for me to accomplish? I didn't invest in values, in love, in connection with my own family. I didn't invest in God. So what happens is this. When you're young, you still see, there's so much to achieve, so much to advance. But I can warn you that in a few years, 10, 20, 30 years, whatever it is, you're going to hit a wall. And you're going to seek and crave some spiritual, transcendental meaning in life. Because we're not going to live forever. We're not going to live forever. So, here is the thing. George Bernard Shaw said, it's a real shame that youth is wasted on young people because young people don't know how to use it. Meaning to say, things that you will understand at 50 or 60, it's a little harder to understand at 20. So I'm trying to give you a message from the after years. And that is, now you have an opportunity that you're not going to have when you're older. I know people say, I'm so busy in school. Please know that you will be much more busy in the working world than you are in school, with all of the pressures that you have. And I know that being a student has pressures. I was a student too. But they're not as bad as the pressures you will encounter in the work world. So now you have an ideal time to build up yourself in ways that when you're 50, 60, or 70, you will have something to hold on to. Okay? Because otherwise it could be very, very depressing. Build up relationships. Build up your connection to God. Build up morality. Build up your Torah knowledge. Create a life and not just a living. Now, practically, how do you do that? Well, again, you try to seek out other people who are similarly motivated. Now, Baruch Hashem, because of Zoom and remote learning, sometimes even if you have nobody on campus, you can create connections remotely. There's a wonderful organization, Partners in Torah, that will set people up with telephonic learning partners all over the world. And you can actually pick the topic that you want to discuss. Called Partners in Torah. You Google it and you'll get information about it. And you try to find rabbis that you can talk to and raise questions with. You try to make Shabbat a very special experience. And again, from my perspective, I would want people to be fully observant, but even if you're not fully observant, to go to a Shabbat meal, to hear the Kiddush, to sing Zemiros, to sit with other Jews and enjoy what Shabbos is. These are wonderful things. You got to savor these experiences and know that even if you don't think that you need it so much now, you will very definitely feel that you need it years from now. And now is the best time that you can plant the seeds that will grow when you need them, sustain you in your life. So do your best, and our sages tell us the way that a person chooses to go is the way that God will lead them. You choose this path, God will open up opportunities for you. Okay? Yes, sir.
What's your opinion on shidduchs? How can you expect to live the rest of your life with someone just off base, being with them for like a month?
Well, listen, I'm not here to give you a definitive list that, after a month you have to get engaged. If you feel you need more time, that's fine. I mean, but the basic idea of shidduch, the basic idea of marriage is a wonderful thing. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but generally speaking, God said about Adam, it is not good for man to be alone. Let me make a helpmate to help him. So we need to connect. We need to create families. We need to have a loving relationship. And spiritually, that's needed as well. Because when we're fixated on our egotism, on our selfishness, there's no room for God. So marriage is about, and parenting even more so, is about putting away your ego and learning to care for another person. And that is a necessary part of the spiritual maturation of a human being, that you go beyond yourself. Now, how do you know someone is the right one? Unfortunately, I cannot always give you an absolute guarantee about that. But generally speaking, you should share common values, common aspirations, a vision of the type of home you want. You enjoy each other's company. You feel that you understand each other. She understands you, you understand her, and there also has to be a certain element of sexual chemistry added to the mix. Doesn't have to be Hollywood or whatever it is. And when that is present, it's a worthwhile risk to take to try to make it work. And then, of course, let me point out that marriages don't work by themselves. They require effort. They require commitment. And a good marriage gets only better by the work that you put in to make that relationship good. So B'ezras Hashem, I hope all of you will find your match in life and be able to create a Jewish home. Yes?
Sorry. As a religious Jew, how do you essentially live within a secular world? Is it better for a Jew to kind of reject secularism and stay within their own bubble, or to kind of live in harmony?
That again is a very, very, very excellent question. And as you know, different thinkers have gone different ways on this. There are Jewish thinkers that say that the secular world is so corrupt, is so degenerate, is so immoral, that the only way I can survive and the only way I can raise my family is trying to separate myself from that world as much as possible. That is a position that has a great deal of cogency, and it's a position that I respect, and I can fully understand it. But if you're asking for my own personal, private opinion, which is not an official position of Ohr Somayach, I think that there is something to be gained, albeit with risks, in being involved in the secular world, because what you're really doing is you're showing that Judaism is not simply separated from the world, but Judaism gives me a value system that can take even the secular parts of the world and elevate them and make them noble and make them holy. And if you look at the philosophy of a great 19th century German rabbi, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, he very much believed in what's called Torah derech eretz, that is, drawing on the culture of the world and integrating it within your Judaism, and that creates a broader, richer, deeper perspective. So, as I say, these are different positions in Am Yisrael, and ultimately, you have to kind of choose which is the path that is best for you, what feeds your soul, what gives you inner joy, what makes you feel closer to God. And there is a lot of room for individual choice in Torah Judaism. On one hand, God gave us the framework of the Torah and the mitzvos that are, in a sense, non-negotiable. But the background and life in which we play it out, there is a great deal of autonomy in what we decide. So I would basically say that both approaches are very, very legitimate. Yes? Yeah, so you're raising quite a few very, very interesting questions. Let me mention, and you probably have learned about this, the concept of the written Torah and what is called the oral Torah. That we believe that God gave Moses the Torah that was written down at Sinai, but in addition there's a supplementary oral interpretations that were handed down and augmented and developed over the years. Many of them were eventually recorded in the Talmud, but the truth is this oral development of the law is still continuing. In many ways, just from a sociological standpoint, the concept of the oral law addresses, I think, your very concern, and that is the written word is static, unchanging, fixed, non-responsive to the changes of life. But once you introduce the notion that the rabbis interpret and apply and extend, like how do you apply the prohibition against fire on Shabbat to electricity or LED? And that's part of the oral process. You've created the flexibility to kind of take the eternal truths and adapt them and apply them to the ever-changing situations of life. This is very significant. The Torah is eternal, but life is ever-changing. And the question is, how do you apply an eternal set of immutable, unchangeable principles to an ever-changing kaleidoscope of life? And the answer is, this is the genius of the oral law that continues. Now, in terms of some of your other questions about authority, that is a real problem, because in truth, the only real authority we had was a Sanhedrin of 70 elders. They were our Supreme Court, and the Torah itself vests them with authority and jurisdiction to determine what Jewish law is. Now, we have not had a Sanhedrin for many, many hundreds of years. We did have it even after the destruction of the temple, but it lapsed in around the 5th century of the Common Era. So today, you are 100% correct that there is no definitive group of rabbis that can tell you what you must do, because no one is a Sanhedrin. So today, the role of a rabbi is that of a scholar, a knowledgeable person, a person who has mastered the sources, and in time, the Jewish people recognize some people as preeminent, some people less so, but in a sense, all halakhic authority today is conferred on a voluntary basis. It's an unusual statement to make, and that simply says the following: I recognize so-and-so as such a great scholar and such a righteous person that I think his opinion should be trusted. So it's not like a pope. No, the pope is institutionally the head of the Roman Catholic Church, so whether you like him or not, what he says is the doctrine of the Catholic Church. That is not quite true in the halakhic system. In the halakhic system, rabbis are turned to because people voluntarily recognize their greatness and their sanctity. Now, on the other hand, that's not insignificant. If somebody is truly righteous and scholarly and spends all of those hours studying Torah and perfects his character, I would want to follow that opinion. Meaning, could that person be wrong? Yes. Maybe I'm right and they're wrong. But what's the probability? Like 1 trillion to 1, right? So it makes no sense for me to say, oh, I'd rather go with my opinion.
But if we look at let's just say a normal person that lives a normal secular life, for example, and you compare them to a very knowledgeable rabbi, they've got a very different perception of the world and have a very different way of viewing things.
You're raising a real good issue, and that is there needs to be matchups between the facts on the ground and the halachic and spiritual knowledge. And a great rabbi will try to get himself educated on what's going on. So, for example, a great rabbi will work with doctors in medical ethics problems. Will try to understand the university campus. You are correct. That is why some have taken the position that the great rabbis in Israel should not necessarily express opinions about what's going on in the United States, and the rabbis of the United States should not necessarily express opinions about what's going on in Israel, because the cultures are different, the facts are different, the situations are different, and you are right. Without a clarity of perception of what a situation is, the rabbi will be unable to render an accurate decision. This is the expression in computer programming, garbage in, garbage out, meaning to say, if the factual input is distorted, the thing that comes out is not going to be accurate either. So you are very correct in pointing out that there are certain problems in the system, but the great rabbis are very conscious of this, and they do try to understand a situation very clearly. Or they will sometimes the greatest rabbi will say, go to the local rabbi in your community who knows the situation. They will actually say, I'm not going to opine on this because I'm not fully familiar with the situation. Okay. Yeah.
Sure. You mentioned Maimonides and Alexander the Great as sources of wisdom.
Yeah.
You were saying, to what degree is it okay to align, for like, I'm talking me personally, I like to look at not Jewish famous people and see how their thought processes align with Judaism.
Yeah, so there is a very famous statement in the Midrash that says, if someone tells you there is wisdom among the Gentiles, you shall believe them, because there can be wisdom and there can be insight from everywhere. If someone says there's Torah among the Gentiles, meaning the highest level of moral understanding of God, that we don't say. That was given to the Jewish people. But Maimonides writes that he will constantly draw on even non-Jewish sources, because if they contain valuable wisdom and insight, why should they be dismissed? Now, you have to be careful, because obviously there'll be many ideas there that are inconsistent with Torah values, and then you have to be able to measure them. But assuming that you have a person you could talk to about it, or you're sufficiently knowledgeable in Torah, there is much that you can gain even from non-Jewish sources. I mean, I'll give you a very simple example, nothing as profound as Aristotle, but Stephen Covey wrote more than one book, but his famous book is 7 Habits of, I forgot the name, 7 Habits of what? I remember the name? Of highly motivated people, successful people? Yeah. So be it as it may, this is a step-by-step in terms of improving your character to become a more disciplined person and a more compassionate person. I am aware of rabbis in yeshiva that actually recommend their students to read that book, written by a Mormon, because it deals with character building. It deals with becoming a better person, which is a goal of Judaism as well. So we don't reject the idea that there can't be wisdom and insight from all thinkers in the world, and we try to take what is good, and we try to reject what is not necessarily going to be good. So it is a legitimate enterprise, but you got to approach it with a certain degree of caution, because, as I say, there may be ideas there that are not in accordance with Judaism. Yeah.
For somebody who isn't that religious and struggles to connect with learning Gemara and grow from that, what would you recommend they start learning?
So I would recommend a few things. Number one, they should definitely start with Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, but they should try to have a commentary like Rashi that integrates some of the Talmudic teachings in the text, so that way you're getting some Talmud in learning the written text. Another thing that would be very good is Mishnah. You know, the Gemara is a long, complicated commentary on the Mishnah. At least that's one of the roles of Gemara. So if you learn Mishnah, you're getting kind of the basic teachings in a way that is not as confusing and not as convoluted and complicated as the dialectic discussion in the Gemara. And the third thing, so Chumash is one thing, the second thing is Mishnah. The third thing I would recommend is that you study the Siddur, you study the Jewish prayer book. The Jewish prayer book has a wealth of knowledge. There are many laws that are printed in Jewish prayer books, like the Art Scroll Siddur. There are passages from the Mishnah, passages from the Gemara, certainly passages from the Bible, like the book of Psalms. So you can actually learn quite a lot about Judaism by just taking a Siddur and going from page 1 to page 1000 and cover all of the content. And I think in that way you could get a good foundation, so that when you are ready to learn Gemara, you'll find that you have the knowledge base that will help you do so in a more efficient manner. Okay? Yeah. Isn't it unfair, you said? Yeah. Yeah, so here there's a very important idea that I need to introduce, and again, I apologize if you're familiar with this idea, and that is, number one, we know that Judaism has a claim which is very unusual. No other religion has it, no other Western religion has it, and that is, we do not believe that Judaism is the only way a human being can come close to God. We do not proselytize, we do not go out and tell other people they have to be Jewish. Judaism is the path for a Jew and for someone who joins the Jewish people by conversion, but Judaism is not the path that is urged upon by other people. Rather, we have a two-track way of connecting to God. Jews connect to God through the Torah, 613 commandments. Non-Jews connect to God through what is called the 7 basic Noahide laws. And you can Google this, you will find that many, many Gentiles now follow the Noahide laws, and that is, they're doing God's will. They don't have to become Jewish. They would even be discouraged from becoming Jewish. Now, our sages tell us, and Maimonides so tells us, that a non-Jew who keeps the 7 Noahide laws as commandments of God will go to the same world to come as a Jew. Because each of us has our mission. My mission, our mission, is to keep the Torah, and his mission is to keep the Noahide laws. If both of us do our job as faithfully as we could, we both have that paradise of eternal connection with the Almighty. So unlike Christianity that basically says unless you embrace Yashka, you go for eternal damnation in hell, we basically believe there are alternative pathways for Jew and Gentile. Yeah.
So on that, let's just say you are living in a culture that doesn't keep the Noahide rules or whatever, and it's like you're born in, I don't know, Southeast Asia with no kind of Western influence, nothing to do with Christianity or Judaism, no Noahide rules, and you are not a good person, but that's beyond you. Is that so much unfair to say that, like, they would never, they would never be in an environment where they were able to practice these rules?
Yeah, that is really, really an excellent question, and really it goes back to our earlier discussion about free will, in which people are placed in environments where they literally didn't have the education or the background or the situation in life to be able to make those choices. How does God judge them? They did not believe in God, they never heard of God, they were not exposed to the Noahide laws. Where is the fairness? So I just throw out this idea that Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition, developed the notion of reincarnation, in which there is always the second chance. You come back in a different environment, and that kind of deals with the issue. Other than that, we would have to assume that God will reward virtuous behaviors in one form or another, but we're not exactly sure about the exact form. Mincha, right? Okay. Anyway, thank you very much. Much hatzlacha, much success. Thank you.